see you here. And we would like to have this panel today. Everybody's going to speak about 10 minutes, and I'm just going to introduce everybody right off at the beginning, and then we'll have them step up. We are going to keep track of the time so that we can have some time for Q&A at the end. So our first speaker will be Dr. Grenville Draper. He has been a long time chair of the Arts and Sciences Tenure and Promotion Committee, and he is going to give his best advice about being prepared for the tenure review process. Then Tim Page from the Robert Stemple College of Public Health and Social Work is going to address the importance of building successful research collaborations. Jennifer Rehash from the Department of Earth and Environment will talk about the importance of having mentors, building a research program, and one's professional visibility in terms of getting good external reviewers for the tenure package. And Jason Pearl from the English department will talk about the stages of the book publication process and strategic choices to make along the way. So I'm very happy to have you here, and we'll start with Dr. Gren Draper, talking about the TME committee.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's been my privilege to have been chair of the Tenure and Promotion Committee for the last 9 years, except for 1 year in the middle when I was restricted by term limitations. So somebody kept my seat warm for me during that year. Arts and Sciences probably sends the most, it's probably about half of the applications every year for tenure promotion. So the rest of the university combined is equal to Arts and Sciences. So I've read a lot of files. We get probably no fewer than 20 per year. So that's a lot of files I've seen. And there have been some changes that have occurred during that time. One is the institution of third-year review, which I'll talk about in just a minute. Another is going from a paper format to an electronic format. And then the other thing that's recently happened that you should be aware of is that we don't do the outside letters like most other universities in the US. According to Florida law, you as the candidate are allowed to see the external letters through Florida Sunshine Law. So that means that the chair has to tell your potential outside reviewers that you will be able to see those letters. The good news is you also have the right of rebuttal at any stage in the process. If you think somebody's got something wrong, you don't agree with either your chair or your committee or even the dean, you're allowed to actually write a rebuttal at any stage of the process. Now, this change in the well, it's not really a change. The thing that the candidate having the right to see the letters has always been there. For a few years, some people waived those rights, but then last year, your union decided this was not in the spirit of Florida law, and in a very close vote, put the kibosh on you deciding to waive your rights to see the letters. So that means now the committee and anyone else reading it knows that you also have the right, that you at least probably had at least the right to look at the letter. The letter writer knows that, and we know the letter writer knows that, so we read the letters accordingly. The outside letters are very important. But let me get back to third-year review. That's the first time you come up against the tenure review process. The third-year review process does work. The idea is if you're going in a wrong direction, then you have some mentors in your department, in your chair, and they can tell you, no, you've got to fix something because you're going in the wrong direction. And I can think of at least one case where I witnessed this and where it did work. The person had to change direction, they had to work very hard, but they did finally get tenure, and it wasn't looking very good in terms of the third-year review. In that case, it was it's a paper-based discipline. The person had not really produced any papers from the work that they'd done for their dissertation or any new work, and fortunately we were able to get those letters out, those papers out and published before the time of going into tenure. In a book discipline, we see this sometimes times, and the important thing for people in book disciplines is whatever it takes, whatever is necessary to get that book accepted, not just submitted, but accepted by the time you go on to tenure. It's really important, and I suppose Jason will speak to that a little bit later. There is a pretty extensive instructions on the Provost's website as to how to prepare the file. And my hint to you from looking at these files is please follow the instructions, because it does lay out where everything needs to be. They're still not the best instructions. There's a little bit of ambiguity and redundancy in them. So hopefully they'll get a little bit better by the time you go up. But at least it means us reading the letters, reading the file, we know where to find stuff. And that's, for us, that's important because we have a lot of these things to read. Time is important. We want to get to the information. We don't want to be trying to hunt around for the information. So please don't make us work harder than we have to in terms of finding the relevant information. That's in any part of the file. If you're in a paper discipline, we rely on the external letters for, as well as your chair and department letters for what is a decent publication rate in your particular field. Particularly the outside letters are very important there. If you want to make life easier for us, and you're in an article field, you know, find out the information. Let us know about things such as your H-index, the acceptance rate of the journals, where if you can find that, it's not always easy to find, impact factors and so on. It saves us looking it up ourselves. We get annoyed having to do that. Sometimes you'll get an external reviewer who will also help you doing that. They'll figure out what your H-index is. And not that there's any number we're looking at, but it does give us some kind of indication as to the impact you're having on your field. My other advice would be, no matter what your chair says, do not take on too much committee work, service work, but don't ignore it altogether. Do a little bit, do something that's easy and not very time consuming, just so you get to know a few people. It helps. But if they ask you to be, you know, the graduate director, you know, don't do it. You just refuse. Because that's very, very time consuming. We do see people do this, and it's great that they can do it, and they still manage to keep going. But it can get in the way. You have to make sure that you've got the right productivity, whatever that is for your particular field. If you are in a field where you can get money, you should be attempting to get money, writing grants, and hopefully you will get them. It's certainly true if you do not write a proposal, you won't get any grants. It is expected, but of course there are many fields where the expectations are a lot less, particularly the humanities and so on. But even in the humanities, you know, a couple of travel grants for $4,000 kind of tells you that, you know, you're doing that little bit extra you maybe don't need to do. But there again, it's still not as important as your book, if you're in the book discipline. Okay, thank you. I didn't realize it was that organized.
2 minutes.
So the main thing is when you're actually doing your file, just lay it out, make sure the information is clear. There's a myth that teaching isn't important. That's not true. It's not as important as your scholarly efforts, but it's still important. And usually the committee likes to see that you've not just taught graduate classes in your tiny bit of the field. If you have done some larger classes, the provost likes to see that too. If you taught some higher enrollment classes. And make sure when you do the teaching evaluations for that you don't just average each semester or each year. We like to see the small classes, the evaluations from the small classes separate from the evaluations from the big classes. It does give us some idea of the quality of your teaching. If all you've done is graduate classes, yes, you're going to get great evaluations. The bigger test is if you do an intro class, have you also got good evaluations? if your department does peer evaluation of teaching, please include those in the file. That also really helps the committee in examining your file. So the main thing is clarity and making sure that we can access the information easily. And of course the other thing that's more difficult to do is get good outside letters. That's less under your control. I think you're only allowed to choose 3. But then your department will choose the others. But you can always drop some hints as to who might be a good person to contact. I can talk about the mechanics of the electronic system, but that's rather dull. You'll figure that out. I think most people, it's actually much easier than doing it on paper. That may change in the next couple of years because they've got a new system they're developing where it should make it easier to put your file together because you put the information in once. If you want a Vita, you press one button. If you want your tenure file, you press another. I don't know how it's going to work out yet. We may be with the present system for a while yet. But there are people to help you if you do run into some technical issues. Let me just finish there. 0 minutes remaining. So, no time for questions, right?
We'll take them at the end.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Were you ready to stop?
I was ready to stop anyway.
Okay. Tim?
All right, can everyone hear me in the back? Yeah.
You want them to stand up?
Great. Yeah, I'll stand up. I'm used to speaking in the chair. So I'm in public health. I'm an economist by training, but I do health economics and policy analysis. Every fall semester, our dean meets with the tenure learning faculty. And without fail, 99% of the questions are about the tenure review process. And I think that's not the right thing to be most worried about at this stage because you have very, very little control over that. What you should be focusing on now is putting together the strongest possible record so that when you go through the process, you're not just meeting the expectations, but you're exceeding them. And so my comments in my 10 minutes will be focused on probably the biggest help for me, which was building productive research collaborations. Not just in my department, because for a lot of my time, I was the only faculty member in my department with a research assignment, not just the college, but across the university. If you're in a field where the publication expectations are 3 articles per year, 4 articles per year, 5 articles per year, you're not going to hit those numbers working alone. That's why it's critical that if that's how your discipline is, that you are actively seeking collaborations. I think when we start our faculty positions, we are still sort of in the doctoral student mindset of I've got to do everything myself. I've got to collect the data, I've got to do the analysis, I've got to write up the results. But as a faculty member, you are allowed to collaborate. And it's a tremendous opportunity because you can sit in your office and write one paper, and your colleague can sit in his or her office and write another paper. And if you do that, you've each got one publication. Or you can work together on both of the papers, and then magically you each have 2 publications. So seems like a good deal. And you're allowed to do that as a faculty member. So strategies that I found useful in building these collaborations, I think the most important thing, number 1, is identify good collaborators. Right? Not everybody here is necessarily someone that you should be working with. A good collaboration is where you contribute something, they contribute something, and the piece of work that comes out of it is better than what you could have done each working independently. A bad collaboration is where you do all the work and other people take the credit. And unfortunately, there are some here who use that model. So my advice to you is before you invest any kind of time and effort into working with somebody you haven't worked with before, run that by people you trust, your department chair, senior faculty in your department, and make sure that's going to be a collaboration that's worth your time. than ideas. In other words, someone might come to you with an idea that you love. But if that person is not productive and doesn't follow through, that project probably isn't going to be successful. So a better model would be to find people who are really good and find areas of mutual interest. You know, putting the people ahead of necessarily the idea. Next thing, if you're going to collaborate, people need to know who you are. What I did was I put together a presentation of what economics is and what it can contribute to other fields. And I gave that presentation to whoever would put me on their department seminar schedule. And it's also useful just to send around to people. And from that, I've got grants, I've gotten publications, and also I'm on a lot of doctoral committees. Now, my department does not have a doctoral degree program, but by being out there and people knowing who I am, you know, I'm on 10 committees now, and all of my reviewers commented favorably on that, you know, mentorship of doctoral students. And not only do you need to get your name out there and let people know who you are, you need to do it really early in your career. Because the tenure clock is deceptively short. You get reviewed during year 6, but you put together your file for external review in the middle of year 5, which means you've really got 4.5 years to put together a strong record for those external reviewers. And as we know, those of you who publish, it can take years before something that you start pays off in something that you can put on a CV, like a grant or a publication. In my case, the things that I started in 2009 and 2010 really didn't start resulting in publications until 2012, 2013, and 2014. And that was something I had to explain in my research statement, that it wasn't a flurry of activity in my last year running up to tenure, but it was things that I was doing early on that paid off at the end. I also want to share, I'll conclude with this, the worst piece of advice I received. Not only was it the worst piece of advice, but it's the one I heard most often. When people would say things like, "Don't worry about it, you'll be fine." No, tenure's kind of a big deal. Like, you should be, it should be on your radar. But again, going back to my first comments, what you should be focusing on now is building your record to be as strong as it can be when you go up through the process. Because if you look at the data, there is a great likelihood of success when you put your application in for tenure. But the challenge is getting there. And you can find those data that are available. But for those of you who are about to go through the process, or maybe you're going through it now, it's really stressful. You spend this year to a year and a half with a bunch of, in some cases, strangers, reviewing your work and making a judgment as to whether you are good enough at your job to keep doing it. So that's a little tough, but for the majority of you, it'll also be very rewarding at the end when you get letters from top scholars in your field saying you're doing great work, you're having a big impact, and FIU is lucky to have you. And then to get that sort of affirmation from your department colleagues, your college committee, your dean, and the provost and the president. Thank you.
Could I add a comment about collaborative work? Sure. This is the way it's usually done these days. The committee is, and the dean and the provost are usually looking for, even though you work with other people, this is very good. But they're also looking that you are the lead author or the corresponding author on some of these publications. A very good thing to do when you're preparing your publication list is If you publish with the student is the lead author, and you'll need it the second author. You need to have a system of asterisks or whatever that indicates that, you know, your student was the lead author. That's considered as equivalent to you being the lead author. Same with a postdoc who may be doing that. So you do need, of all the collaborative work, you do need some where you're clearly the lead author. That definitely helps your case. If you have very few of those, you know, it puts you into an iffier area. But you do need to have some system to work out how you indicate that on your publication list.
Jen? Great. So how many of you are pre-third year review? Some of you are post-third year review. Okay. So I thought what I would share with you are things that I wish I had done earlier. And sort of things that I wish I would have taken some stress out for my fourth and fifth year. So I could do, focus on research and doing fun stuff. So the first thing I would say is building those relationships for your outside letters that are so important. So wherever you are in your process, I would suggest that you start today writing that list of who those people would be who would be awesome letter writers for you. And closely examining that list today, and then figure out what the holes are. Are the most prominent people in the field, people that should be in that list? And if not, how do you get them on that list? And what you mean is you want them to know you. They want them to know of you. You can't have a established relationship, but you want them to know of you. So if they get a request for a letter, it's something, they have a name and a place. You met them at a meeting, you invited for a talk, you had perhaps a panel that you shared, you read proposals together. So they know of you, they know of your work, they know the caliber of your work, and they can speak about that caliber without having that collaboration. So I would encourage you, and that's something I did a little bit later, I wish I had started that process earlier, to make sure that I identified those people early. Make that list today. I would suggest you do that right now. Make that list today, and how do you get them to know you? How do you get them to know you? Do you want to be part of, offer to be a paper, if they're chief editor of a journal? I mean, how do you get on their radar? So that's a really good piece of advice. I thought, for me, the journal review process was the most stressful. It's so early in tenure, as mentioned before, because you're doing your spring, you're getting ready for tenure for the next fall, but you already have to think about who those letter writers are going to be, who should be on that list, and who should not be off that list, so that people can be found, right? Because you don't want to suggest not everybody can be in that list. So I would suggest, I think that would be one of the most important things I would want to share with you
I'd like to
guys.
add that it's probably good that they're similar institutions or better institutions than FIU. Chose those people, because the best letter you can get from an outside reviewer is, you know, if this person were here at Purdue University, she would definitely get tenure. You know, you get that kind of letter, that's very, has to have a lot of weight to the committee.
Good point. And the other thing, make sure if you find those people, you don't get too close to them. Because another thing, if you invite them for a seminar, for instance, I found this person that was wonderful, I started collaboration with her, but then I started collaborating with her. And she immediately became not a letter writer. And you have to be really careful. And I developed this relationship with her in mind. She's an NSF program officer, and I was like, oh, she's wonderful, great mentor, so career mentor. But then I got too close, and we submitted a proposal for our students to work together on something, and that was a conflict of interest, that she was off my list. So make sure you travel that road carefully. So if you want to be a letter writer, you can't get too close to make sure that it's not a conflict of interest. So that's an important point. The other thing is make sure you have a good mentor. I had a great mentor in my department we had a formal mentoring program in my department. I don't know if you have that in yours, but with my mentor, I would meet with her once per semester, once per year, and she was really good about helping me prioritize. For instance, for the summer, I have to possibly write this grant proposal or write these 2 papers. Here's where my CV is today. This is where I am today. And she would look at my CV and she would say, no, you need to get 2 papers out. Or I would tell her this paper got rejected, this paper got accepted, this is the caliber, this is the impact factor. And she would give me a lot of strategy as to what the next move would be. And that was really useful for me to prioritize, because you often have so many things, and if you're going to write a grant proposal that's 6 to 8 weeks, that means a paper doesn't get written, and you have to make a choice, right, at some point. So she was really good at helping prioritize.
editor has an idea of who you are, has an image of your face, and has sort of talked with you a little bit, you become more than just a piece of paper on the desk. And I think that's really important. The fourth thing I would say is I guess, strategizing for those responses to the readers' reports that you write. You want to share your response to the readers' reports and your proposal to make revisions with other people. You definitely want to find out from colleagues and mentors whether you're being appropriately gracious. I would say it's not a time to dig in and hold grudges. You want to try, and other people might disagree with all of this, by the way, but I would say that you want to try to agree to making as many changes as you think you can. And then, of course, what you say you're going to do in the response and the proposal to make revisions is not necessarily what you end up doing exactly. There's a way to kind of finesse all this. I think that what you really want to do is make the editor see that the process is working, that the advice that you're getting is helpful, and that it's making the project better, ultimately. And there is definitely room here for, principled stance, I would say. So don't be afraid of that, but I think that you want to be very careful about not fighting unnecessary battles at this stage. And then the last thing I would say, number 5, is really, it's really just a quality of life thing. A couple of you have talked about how much anxiety this process can produce, and that's certainly true. You want to find a way to be productive, but also stay mentally healthy. You need to get support from your family, from your partners, from your colleagues and friends and mentors. And I would say come up with a working schedule that allows you to worry about the details, not the sort of like big picture. You don't want to be worrying every day about, can I do this? Am I going to get this finished? You want to be worrying about, all right, well, how am I going to, figure out this little problem here? There's definitely, I think, for me anyway, in the first few years, there's a way in which what felt like procrastination was really just sort of like digesting the ideas and reflecting, and I think that was ultimately important. But you want to make sure that you're not just sort of like deferring something that's not really going to change if you do it today or next year. And also, the last thing I would say is that you should be thinking about your first book as your first book. It's not the best thing you're ever going to do. It's hopefully going to get you tenure, but you shouldn't be thinking about it as sort of like the last statement that you're going to make. There's a lot more that I could say about this. By all means, email me if you want to. I'll get coffee with you and talk with you more about this. And get advice from other people, I would say, as well. There's a useful book called, I think it's called Getting It Published by William Hermano, which I found useful. It's Germano. I think he used to be the editor at University of Chicago Press. So get other opinions, talk to me more about it if you want to, and good luck.
I'll take the liberty of making a few comments before we take questions. I wanted to mention, did everybody get one of these tenure promotion handouts? Okay. On page 25, there's a lot of detail about the external reviews. And one of my areas of research has been professional networking. It is very important that you establish that professional network. As Jen said, my first year, I realized, oh my God, I'm going to have to be reviewed by these external people. And I did make a list, and I planned then my conference recommendations to try to include those folks. It is helpful sometimes to look at who you're citing in your research, because that's a guide to who is going to be interested in what you're doing. So that's one place to look. The other comment I wanted to make is on the page 1 of this, it says in the end of the second paragraph, tenure guarantees annual reappointment for the academic year until voluntary resignation, retirement, or removal for just cause, which is incompetence or misconduct, or layoff. So this is very sweet. We're in a very privileged position in academe to have the right to have tenure. Unless you really screw up, you can stay as long as you want. So it is well worth working for, and it does get better after you get through the hoop. So we'll take questions now, and should we start over here?
Sure. To Jennifer, I have, and to Glenn, I guess, I have a mentor who's out of the department. And I remember, because I've been to every one of these meetings that they put on. I'm in my 4th year, but I'm up for 3rd year review. My advisor, or my mentor told me, stay away from students.
Yeah.
So I worry about, you and I sit in the same department,
Yeah.
but although we have sort of different
Yeah.
fields, but that seemed like pretty good advice. First of all, it's kind of good advice in that I get more of my own time, but it is a concern when I go up, for tenure some period of time after someone like yourself has gone up with several students. You're always wondering, well, should I have, what's the right number?
Let's see, so I know when I went up, even though we didn't have a PhD program, having a PhD student mentor through another department was important. So I made sure that I had a student, or I had the funding to support a student through another department, and get that worked out, and also made some negotiations to get a TA through a different department because we didn't have a PhD program. But I think it was important to do that. So you want to have, I think you want to have a PhD student that works.
Yeah.
And
I do. I mean, I've graduated a master's student, and I've
Yeah.
got another student, but I'm trying to keep that number, purposely trying to keep the number kind of low.
Yeah, so it depends on what your research area and your working style.
Mm.
For me, I'm doing field work, and I'm
Right,
collecting
get them
data.
out there, sure.
So I need bodies to do
Yeah.
this. So either I'm going to hire somebody, or I'm going to get a student. My experience has been that I can do both, but I feel like the students are much more productive
Okay.
because they're much more committed. So I had a number of commissions that become students. They're much more committed. It's a project. They have ownership. So you can have good employees, and people have, really good employees. But for instance, when I first got here, I got a lab manager to sort of manage the lab, get things set up, and that didn't turn out to be so productive. I could have used that money much better in a couple of students, because they're much more, I had found that students are much more, it's their project, it's their lives, it's their, their productivities, they pour their hearts into it. It's not just a job,
Right.
Although again, I've had really good experience with commissions and then became grad students. So it depends on your needs. Like for us that are doing field, we need people collecting the data, so we need bodies, and I think I have found that it works best with students. But if you don't need that, and if you can get those publications, that you mentioned yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and if you can have a couple students in the works, and that works, and that's probably okay.
And I guess to Grant, is there any sort of, from the view of the committee, who's considering applicants?
Well, I think if the department has a graduate program, either master's or PhD, and you don't have any students, they would look at some askance at that. I mean, they said, well, why isn't this guy mentoring any students? Now, it may not be a lot. We also realize that, availability of good students is not something that's always under your control. But we would be a little bit suspicious for a department that has a PhD and a master's program if they didn't have any students. Now, that being said, it also depends on the discipline. So we think that for the sciences, but we do know that in many departments, particularly humanities and some of the social sciences, that they do not encourage people to mentor a student until they get tenure. And that is hopefully something that the chair addresses or the department, human resources person addresses in the letter. You should try to make sure that, especially if you're in a department that is that way, that they don't want you to mentor a student until you get tenure. You should make sure that that gets in the letter from your chair. On the other hand, it's a good idea to be on committees, even if you're not the main advisor. First of all, it teaches you how the system works, and it shows that you're involved in the intellectual life of your department. So, like a lot of things in life, it's a judgment call. But in your case, Rob, we expect you to see that you have mentored some students. I don't think there's a specific number, because we know that, even though we're in the same department, our fields are quite different, and your way of working is quite different.
Go on, Maya.
Hello, thank you very much for all your advice. I have a practical question. I'm in my 4th year, I'm coming up next year, and I was
I won't
wondering...
be chair of the committee next year.
No. It's just a general question for the whole panel. I'm in modern languages, which is in the humanities, and I wanted to have access to some files of candidates before me, and when I talked to Priscilla Williams, who is supposed to have an answer about this, she told me that it's quite difficult to have access to the online files now that everything is online. And Pascal Bessel was involved as my chair in the process, was also unable to give me the answer. Then do you have some answer about this?
The other thing I can suggest that this has not come up previously, although it was something that I was going to bring up. I don't know whether this would be solved, but I mean, the only thing I think is that the way you would have done this in the past is that you would have a mentor or someone you in the department, you'd walk down the hallway and say, can I see your tenure file?
Of course.
And that days when it was in a binder.
I know.
And so it may be that you could still do the same, but in this case you would walk down with your flash drive in your hand and say, can I have a look at the files you've prepared for your tenure? However, that wouldn't have the outside letters in it.
Of course.
But then that colleague may not wish to share the outside letters with you anyway.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing I can suggest you do for the time being. These things are so, the traditions of each discipline are so different that it probably wouldn't do you a lot of good to see a file from history,
Of course.
even though it's another humanities, just because their
Exactly.
traditions are
Exactly.
different. But you must, I would imagine you have some colleagues who would be willing to share, some who've got tenure recently would be willing to share their stuff, unless their hard drive crashed and they no longer have files. That's the only thing I can suggest at the moment.
Just looking at their CVs is helpful because you can see what they had when they came in and how much they had.
Of course, no, but it's much more about the physical aspect of it and the presentation, which is important, as you mentioned, the way it's organized and the way it's presented. I think it's great to have to see it, just to see how it looks like.
We probably could get you a screenshot of what the layout is like.
Yeah.
But I still think that the easiest way is going to be find a colleague who's recently been through that.
But if I'm right, it's not public records, right? You need to go and ask the person.
Yeah, you would need their permission, I think,
Yeah.
to look at that. I don't think we.
Jason,
But it is an interesting point that we need to bring
Jason
up.
has a comment over here.
Oh, no,
Oh, I want to get to some other questions.
I understand exactly what you're saying. I mean, it can be helpful to know how
How big is
people
it?
have
And
broken, what categories they've
Yeah,
used for their
exactly.
documents, how they've structured each of those
Yes.
documents, how long they are, the specific kind of idiosyncratic format of the FIU CV, which is weird. It's useful to be able to see that. I've been able to find it sometimes when I just sort of like use the portal login, my FIU login at the tenure promotion portal. I've been able to look at other people's files, but sometimes it's a little tricky. I haven't always been able to do it. So I think it would be helpful to talk to the people at the technology people who do it. There's usually like a seminar at the beginning of the semester on how to use the new site and how to your documents. And so those would be the people to talk to, and they'll probably just say, here's how you navigate to it, and you'll be able to look at other people in your department who went up for. Did anyone go for tenure recently?
Yes, and the question is partly solved because I can have access to the file, and our colleague was quite kind opening up the file for me. But my question was a general question. I mean, do I have to go through the process asking the colleague, or is there somewhere I can go?
Yeah,
and
this
just
is
look at
something
them?
we really need to bring up with the Provost Office, and it had come up once before. And at one time, the College of Arts and Sciences made a couple of past files available to have in the Dean's office so that people could look at them. But again, the one I remember I consulted was one from psychology, which turned out to be not that different from my field, but it was different enough that, to use it as a template was not quite. And we do see a lot of difference in the files just because there is a different interpretation by each candidate of the rules. So in terms of length, for example, there can be quite some variation. In general, we notice that the humanities tend to be a little more verbose than, say, the sciences, who are somewhat more terse.
Thank you.
But then I think I can not give any secrets away, saying the most terse files are from the Department of Mathematics, which ironically is the one department that needs the most explanation to people who are non-mathematicians.
So, Eric?
This is mostly a question for Grant. Have you seen people from the sciences who have a lot of collaborative papers annotate their contribution to every single manuscript, or just highlight first correspondence?
You mean in
and all
terms of percentage of effort? Kind of?
Or I wrote these methods, laid out this design.
No, not in that detail. People usually, if it's a two-author paper and it's you and your student, you usually put the student first unless they've done something to upset you.
Right.
And then you're the second author, but then you will, use an asterisk or something to indicate my student or that you were the corresponding author or whatever. People don't get into that level of detail that we're trying to indicate.
I'm from experimental nuclear physics, so I have a question about the external reviewer. So it's actually kind of hard to find somebody in this field that let's just say, I know I've never really worked with this particular person on any particular project, but he or she probably was on the same paper at one point of my
I should
previous life.
explain that his field, you probably have like about 500 authors on each paper.
Yeah.
And so there are people there who was a co-author with who's never even met. And these drive us crazy. Not so much myself because I've gotten used to them and I know what it means. In that case, don't worry about it.
Okay.
As long as you know.
If they know my work and we actually have never
The
worked
way I've seen it, usually there's about 4 authors at the beginning who are not in alphabetical order, and those are the ones who really wrote the paper, and then everybody else is in alphabetical order. So in that case, I think it's understood, at least within the College of Arts and Sciences, that that field is that way, and that you may be a collaborator technically, but
Okay, I can choose.
and the provost understands that too.
Okay.
But it drives my colleague crazy. We get these, especially in the humanities, and they're like, well, this has got, this paper's got 200 authors. It's like the first 4 pages of just a list of authors, and they don't kind of know how to deal with it. And it's usually one of the other scientists on the committee that ends up, either myself or one of the other scientists that ends up explaining how that field works. But then again, it's also covered by your chair's letter and maybe the department letter. So it should be addressed there. The more information like this are quirks that are specific to your field, that they're addressed in the chair's letter. So make sure when your chair drafts his letter that you get to see it and maybe say, well, assuming you don't have a hostile chair, saying, well, you should put something about, the way we do this in the letter. That really does help the committee understand, because that is a big challenge for us. It's the different traditions in each discipline. And even within one department, like blood and in cultural studies has 3 different disciplines, all of which have their own traditions in one department. So it can be a challenge. Thank you.
Is that common, that the chair will share his or her letter?
We will see, yes, you will see it.
Yes.
You will see it, whether they are open to changing anything as per your suggestion. That may come down to even personal thing. But you will see it. You certainly are allowed to see it. And if you don't like it, you can write a rebuttal.
Right.
But I'd be careful with rebuttals. It can seem a little whiny.
We should seek advice. Also, I would say for your personal statements, your research statement, teaching, and service, it really is good to do that early on and have somebody look at it. Sometimes you don't want it to be a chronology or laundry list of what you've done. You really want to think about what your impact been. And I think that's hard to do for yourself sometimes.
You know, and
First round.
when I was talking about clarity, I mean, one of the things is, I mean, make it perfectly clear. Supposing you did a long postdoc somewhere and you have a bunch of publications there, and then you came to FIU, you know, what I saw a lot of people do recently was, and it was great, they said, you know, they broke up a list of publications that before FIU and then since coming to FIU. So we don't have to, the committee doesn't have to do that, because we will. So you might as well do it yourself. And then we see, okay, well, we know these publications are since FIU.
That's not required in the...
I don't think it says as such that it's required, but it's not a bad
Or to
idea.
number them.
I know there was...
I mean, it speaks to the thing about clarity. If you do that, we look at you and saying, oh, this person's being upfront. You know, they're not trying to hide anything. What is really bad is when we think somebody's hiding something. You know, it's like having a gap in your CV, and it's like, well, what did they do between 2003 and 2005? Were they in jail? You know, so.
So in that vein, I came here with an external grant that I co-wrote as a postdoc. So there are things that started as a postdoc that
Then explain it.
were funded here.
Tell us how it's out. Don't have us guessing. Actually, spell it out for us.
Also, reflecting on the question on this one, you could use your support letters to address those issues. If you have a collaborator or you have a major paper, you're a co-author, but it's a science paper or a nature paper, but you want to then talk about your work and your role, you're not just writing the coattails kind of thing, you can use those support letters to talk about your contribution to those grants and those collaborations.
It's sort of related to that, but I didn't mention it earlier. You might have had a very productive collaboration with your advisor, but the committee likes to see some indication that you cut the apron strings and that you've gone on your own. So we had some files where, even to the year of tenure, this person is still publishing with their advisor, and then we're left thinking, well, how much of it is the advisor and how much of it is the candidate? Now, we don't normally want letters from the advisor, but there could be a solicited letter from the advisor saying that, well, I'm still only on this paper because of something to indicate that. But we like to see that the person's moving away and moving them with their own steam.
Tim, would you like to add anything? Since we talked about collaborations.
Yeah, just, one of the most important pieces of your file will be that 6-page statement on your teaching, research, and service. That's your opportunity to take control of the narrative that emerges about you and who you are. Because you can give your CV to 10 different people, and they will craft 10 different stories about who you are, what you've done, and where you're going. So that really is your opportunity to take control of what emerges about you and explain these sorts of things. And like Suzanne was saying, do it early. Get lots of feedback on it. Mine went through about 20 different revisions. Because the first one I wrote was, I published all these papers, I did all this stuff, look at how great I am. And they said, but this says nothing about what you're going to contribute going forward and why FIU should give you what a lot of times amounts to a lifetime appointment.
You also want to get involved in your profession, but be cautious about doing anything that's too much of a time sink. But, if you end up organizing a symposium at a national meeting or something like this, even early in your career, kind of shows everybody that you're taking a leadership position already, and just getting a symposium together is quite a bit of work, but it's not that much work. It's not a career killer. So while we often say no service, maybe that's in the department, but professional service can be quite important, and especially then it also puts you in contact with those very same people who might be writing.
I'd like to say, as an example, I did that in my first year as an assistant professor, and when I suddenly was not mentored well, so I didn't realize I would need to have these external letters. I invited a high-profile person whom I knew to be on a panel, and then because that person was on there, all these other well-known people were willing to be on it, whereas if I had just approached them for myself, they would have probably said no. But then they all became letter writers for me later on. So just that one symposium made a difference in my career. And I also know somebody who was very successful at the University of Michigan, became in charge of the speaker series in her first year and invited everybody in she needed to know. So she was set by year 2 with knowing people that were, as you said, acquainted with you already. But one other comment about the narrative. I have a lot of research interests, and some of you do as well. And you do have to write that narrative, otherwise it'll look like you're doing disparate types of things and people won't see what the theme or the continuity is. It really is your chance to tell people what you're doing and why it's important. So that narrative, I think that research statement is one of the most important things you'll ever write. So do that early and get some feedback on it. And Jason, you'd like to add anything else? Because we're going to have to wind up here in a minute. So.
No. About the research statement?
No,
or-
about any aspect of this. I thought what you said about the review process was very similar even to the publishing.
Mhm.
You know, that back and forth with criticisms, and you have to not be faint of heart.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is, I think, yeah, you can make, there are ways to make professional context that don't take a lot of time out of your writing schedule that can be really helpful down the road, because you are going to need, for your book, you're going to need to propose a group of people to be potential peer reviewers. And actually, that's a point at which you can say, I don't want these particular people to be these people to be reviewers for my book. That's important to keep in mind as well. But going to conferences and maybe doing some of that professional service can help you, I guess, aggregate a list of people you'll need for reviewing your book and reviewing your tenure file as well. So I agree.
We know this room is, we have to vacate in a minute or two, so are there any other questions before we wind up?
I can. So, did I hear you correctly when you said that? Did I hear you correctly in saying that a letter from your advisor is unwelcome in the tenure file?
Yeah.
Because I actually asked that exact same question to a Turing Award winner who visited our department to give a talk, who's basically a Nobel Prize winner in our field at MIT, and I said, should I be asking my advisor for a letter? And he said, absolutely. So, I'm surprised to hear that.
A letter from your advisor, we expect is going to be glowing. We don't expect, so it doesn't carry any weight.
It's in engineering,
Maybe it's a little different engineering, but if it's an explanatory letter that, maybe explains why you collaborated so much.
I don't think it would be good to use one of your external reviewers, but maybe
No,
a
definitely not.
supplemental
We definitely would not want
letter.
an external review, but even though it's unusual, even at least in arts and sciences, to have letters from your ex-advisor, because it's sort of expected. Well, of course they're going to write a good letter. I mean, why would they want to assassinate their own student? So it's. And it's the same. I don't think you want to have too many solicited letters either. I think it's good if you've had a good collaboration with a separate school, or you have a joint appointment with another institute or something like that. But you don't want peppered with a lot of a Draper, just Draper at FIU, there's no initial on it. I'd be happy to, or call me, I'd be happy to talk over this if anybody wants other information.
Let's thank our wonderful panel. Also, if anybody has signed up for the Len Dickman workshop tomorrow, it's been canceled due to illness, so just want to make sure you knew about that evaluation workshop.